What would you do if the same cops who humiliated you were suddenly standing in your courtroom, handcuffed, begging for mercy? This isn't just a story, it's a jaw-dropping journey of survival, justice, and unstoppable power. A black widow, broken by tragedy, pushed to the edge by corrupt officers, rises from the ashes, and when they see her in the judge's seat, their world crumbles in real time. Before we dive in, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if you're ready for a story packed with suspense, emotion, and shocking karma. You won't believe what happens next. Rain lashed down in thick sheets over the small town of Dunhill, soaking its cracked sidewalks and filling the air with the stench of wet pavement. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business, where secrets festered under smiling faces. And it was the kind of place where the badge often held more weight than the law. Valerie Monroe stood under the flickering light outside a rusted grocery store, her black trench coat clinging to her body. Her eyes, dark, intense, and unflinching, locked onto the 3 patrol cars that had pulled up without sirens, without warning. The officers climbed out, their hands already resting on their belts, thumbs brushing over holstered weapons. "You're loitering," one of them growled. He was stocky, face red from years of bourbon and bigotry. His name tag read Sergeant Klein. "We've had complaints." Valerie didn't flinch. She simply turned her gaze toward him, calm but unwavering. "I'm waiting for my ride." "Don't get smart," barked the second officer, Deputy Larson, tall and twitchy, eyes darting like he was always ready to run. "What's in the bag?" "A book," she answered, holding out a small black handbag. Klein snatched it without asking. He dug through it roughly, pulling out her wallet, some keys, and a worn leather journal. He sneered. "What's this, some kind of poetry? Trying to write your sad little life story?" The third cop, Officer Brewer, younger and quiet, stood slightly behind the other 2. His nervousness made him seem human, almost. "You from around here?" Klein asked, stepping closer. "No," Valerie replied coolly. "I used to be." That was enough to light a fire in him. He shoved her against the brick wall, pressing his forearm across her shoulder. "You got a mouth on you. What's your real reason for standing here? You dealing? Waiting for someone shady?" "Let me go," she said, voice low but fierce. "Oh, she thinks she's tough," Larson sneered, pulling out a pair of cuffs. "I'm not resisting," Valerie said, eyes narrowing. "But you're making a mistake." Klein leaned in close. "Lady, around here, we are the law. You don't tell us what's a mistake." With a loud clink, the cuffs locked around her wrists. They marched her to the car as rain soaked her hair. No Miranda rights were read. No charges were mentioned. Inside the patrol car, Valerie stared straight ahead. Her face didn't twitch. She just waited. Back at the Dunhill station, they put her in a holding cell, grimy, dimly lit, stinking of mildew and sweat. They didn't log the arrest. No paperwork. No call allowed. Larson tossed her bag onto the desk and flipped open her ID again. Valerie Monroe. Ha. No priors. Widow. He snorted. "Poor dead husband. Bet he died to get away from you." Brewer shot him a glance. "That's enough, man." Klein kicked back in his chair. "You know what I hate? Outsiders who come back here acting like they still belong. This one probably thinks she's special." "She's trouble," Larson added, smirking. "Think she's got a record somewhere else?" Brewer frowned. "We should run it through the system. This doesn't feel right." Klein waved him off. "You scared of a woman now? Don't be a rookie." From her cell, Valerie listened. Her face didn't move, but her mind raced. She remembered every word, every sneer, every violation. The same kind of men who once dismissed her husband's mysterious death, called it an accident despite the bruises and the threats. They'd never taken her seriously. But they would. After 3 hours in the cell, Valerie was abruptly released without explanation. Her bag was tossed back, contents jumbled. Klein grunted, "Get lost." She stepped out into the night, free but not finished. A week later, in the heart of downtown, the Dunhill courthouse buzzed with anticipation. A big case was coming down, a corruption trial that had already captured media attention. Cops were rumored to be on the chopping block. The courtroom was packed. Klein strutted in, wearing a fresh suit, trying to look like he wasn't sweating bullets. Larson followed, jittery as ever. Brewer lagged behind, face pale, lips pressed tight. They were here for testimony. They weren't sure which case. But they were summoned nonetheless. Internal Affairs had gone quiet on the details. Then the bailiff stood tall and announced, "All rise." The room stood. The door behind the bench creaked open, heels echoed as the new judge emerged from the chamber. Klein turned. Larson's smirk disappeared. Brewer's jaw dropped. There she stood, black robe flowing like a cloak of vengeance. Her piercing eyes scanned the room, unchanged from that stormy night. Valerie Monroe sat in the judge's seat. The silence in the courtroom was thick, so heavy it seemed to crush the very air out of the room. Klein blinked, then blinked again. Larson stared, lips parted, trying to process what he was seeing. Brewer, hands clammy, knees trembling, sank into the nearest bench as if gravity had suddenly doubled. "Be seated," Judge Valerie Monroe said, her voice calm yet commanding. It echoed like thunder across the marble walls. Everyone obeyed. She adjusted the robe around her shoulders, then fixed her gaze on the prosecutors and defense attorneys below. "Let's proceed," she said with cold precision, pretending as if she hadn't just locked eyes with the 3 officers who illegally detained her less than a week ago. The case was State versus Clyde Mercer, a well-connected man facing charges of bribery, obstruction, and illegal campaign financing. But beneath the surface, this case was more than just about him. It was about who helped him, who looked the other way, and who enforced his will. Klein shifted in his seat, clearly trying to hide his discomfort. His fingers tugged at his collar, sweat pooling beneath his crisp shirt. Monroe noticed everything. Valerie watched the evidence being presented, but her mind ticked like a metronome. She hadn't seen Klein and his 2 officers listed as key witnesses. That meant only one thing: they weren't just testifying. They were suspects. The courtroom buzzed as Prosecutor Diane Ellis stepped forward. "Your Honor, the state intends to introduce a surprise witness, someone whose testimony may implicate certain law enforcement officers connected to the defendant's activities." Monroe raised an eyebrow. "You may proceed, Counselor." Larson jolted upright in his seat. "They're not talking about us, are they?" he whispered to Klein. Klein hissed back, "Shut your mouth and sit still." Brewer was already pale. He looked ready to bolt. The back door opened, and a tall man entered, a former officer from a neighboring county. He looked nervous but determined. As he raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth, his eyes never left Monroe. "This witness," Ellis began, "served on the same task force as several officers from Dunhill. He'll testify about off-the-record raids, unlogged arrests, and financial favors exchanged for silence." Valerie leaned forward slightly, gaze never leaving the man in the witness box. "Mr. Travis," Ellis continued, "can you tell the court what you witnessed during your assignment with Sergeant Alan Klein, Deputy Marcus Larson, and Officer Greg Brewer?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Larson turned to Klein, panicking. "Why is he naming us?" Klein's fists clenched. "He's bluffing." But Travis wasn't bluffing. With every word, he peeled back layers of corruption like rotting wallpaper. Unlawful detainments. Intimidation of civilians. Fabricated reports. Even hush money taken from known associates of Clyde Mercer. Valerie's gavel struck once, crack, as murmurs swelled. "This is a courtroom, not a marketplace." "One more outburst, and I'll clear the gallery," she said coldly. Klein slumped in his seat. His eyes darted toward the doors, calculating. Larson looked like he might pass out. Brewer buried his face in his hands. Travis finished his testimony, and the room fell quiet once more. Monroe turned her attention to the defense. Cross-examination. "No questions at this time, Your Honor," the attorney mumbled, clearly rattled. Valerie stared directly at Klein as she spoke. "Very well. The court will recess for lunch. We'll resume at 1:30. She slammed the gavel. Bang, in her chambers. Valerie removed her robe and stared at her reflection in a dusty mirror. For years, she'd been told she wasn't judge material. Too emotional. Too black. Too female. Too opinionated. But the same legal system that once shut its doors in her face now bowed when she entered. Her phone vibrated. It was from her friend inside Internal Affairs. "We got the footage. From the grocery store parking lot. It's bad." Her eyes narrowed. Perfect timing, she whispered. Back in the hallway, Klein barked at Larson and Brewer. We need to get ahead of this. If Travis keeps talking, we're screwed. We're already screwed, Brewer whispered, trembling. She's the one we arrested. Klein growled. So what? That was a week ago. She's bluffing. No way she's got anything on us. Larson paced nervously. They're gonna review our reports. They're gonna find out we never logged her arrest. You know that, right? Then we fix it, Klein snapped. We write the report now. Say we mistook her identity, released her immediately. No harm done. Brewer's voice cracked. They'll see right through that. She can't retaliate from the bench. That would be judicial misconduct, Klein said, eyes wild. She has to stay neutral. But none of them truly believed that. Not after the look in Valerie's eyes. At 1:30 p.m., the courtroom filled again. Judge Monroe entered with quiet fire in her eyes. Court is now back in session. A new piece of evidence was introduced, video footage from a security camera at the grocery store. Valerie didn't flinch as the bailiff rolled in a large scream. Klein's face went pale as the footage began. It showed him and his partners arriving. It showed them grabbing Valerie, searching her, mocking her, handcuffing her, and dragging her away, without reading her rights, without cause. The room erupted, even the jury gasped audibly. Monroe raised her gavel. Silence. Klein leapt to his feet. This is irrelevant. What does this have to do with Mercer's case? Everything, Valerie said calmly. The witness has testified to multiple instances of abuse of authority in conjunction with Mr. Mercer's activities. This footage establishes a pattern, and your role in it. Klein turned red, Larson sat frozen, and Brewer quietly broke down in tears. Valerie sat tall, voice steady. You may want to speak with counsel, Sergeant. The U.S. Attorney's Office is watching. Then she turned to the prosecutor. Call your next witness. The tension inside the courtroom grew thicker with every passing second. Valerie Monroe, seated high above in her judge's chair, was the eye of a storm she herself had stirred. Calm, composed, and laser-focused, she watched the tremors ripple through the three officers below. Klein's hands twitched against the wooden armrest of his bench. He was no longer the cocky officer who had laughed as he shoved Valerie into a squad car without explanation. His badge had been a shield of arrogance, but now, under the glare of justice, that shield cracked. Prosecutor Diane Ellis turned the heat up. Your Honor, the state calls Dr. Melinda Hayes to the stand. Valerie gave a curt nod. Proceed. Dr. Hayes was a trauma specialist. Her credentials were impeccable. Her testimony, however, was what would leave the courtroom stunned. Once sworn in, Dr. Hayes adjusted her glasses and began. I evaluated a woman, unknown to me at the time to be the Honorable Judge Valerie Monroe, after an unlawful detainment. She showed clear signs of physical distress, minor bruises to the wrist, and acute psychological trauma. Gasps echoed. The defense team tried to object, but Valerie cut them off with a steely gaze. I will allow it. Can you specify what kind of psychological trauma, Doctor? Ellis asked. Severe humiliation, Dr. Hayes said plainly. And a heightened stress response. She was publicly searched by male officers, denied the right to an attorney, and mocked during detainment. The room was dead silent. Larson had gone sheet white. Brewer looked like he wanted to disappear into the woodwork. Klein, furious, leaned into his lawyer's ear, whispering rapidly. Ellis wasn't finished. And, Doctor, was this incident reported through the proper law enforcement channels? No, Hayes said without hesitation. Because the officers failed to log the arrest. It never officially happened. Monroe's gavel struck. BAM, we will recess for 15 minutes, she declared, rising from the bench. Outside the courtroom, reporters scrambled for position. Microphones thrust forward. Flashbulbs snapped like lightning. Judge Monroe, is it true you were the victim of police misconduct? Will the officers face charges? Valerie kept walking. A deputy blocked the press from crowding too close. Inside her private chamber, she closed the door behind her and took a long breath. She picked up the phone. Did they get the warrant? She asked. A pause. Then a voice replied, just approved. Federal agents are on standby. She smiled, a sharp, satisfied smile. Good. I want it served before court ends today. Her friend on the other end chuckled. You're really going to make them sweat? They made me bleed, she replied coldly. They made me beg. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, Klein was pacing like a caged animal. Larson followed closely, trying to keep up. We need to run, Klein hissed. Larson gawked. What? Are you out of your mind? They've got footage. Medical testimony. Now they're dragging up old task force business. What do you think comes next? Brewer finally spoke up. We can't run. That'll make us look guilty. Klein turned on him. We are guilty, moron. He stopped pacing and looked back toward the courthouse, a war zone behind granite walls. She's not just a judge. She's coming for us. Back in the courtroom, the final witness of the day stepped forward, Agent Marco Torres from Internal Affairs. Ellis smiled like a lion. Your Honor, Agent Torres has conducted a confidential investigation over the past 8 months into law enforcement corruption in the Dunhill region. He has something very interesting to share. Monroe nodded slowly. Proceed. Agent Torres adjusted his tie. He was direct, emotionless. During our investigation, we found falsified records, concealed evidence, and clear signs of collusion with known criminal entities. At least 3 officers, working under Sergeant Alan Klein, routinely executed unauthorized stops. Gasps again. One juror's jaw dropped. Deputy Marcus Larson and Officer Greg Brewer were present for several incidents where suspects, mostly black individuals, were unlawfully detained and never charged. In multiple cases, money was seized and never recorded. Objection. Klein's attorney stood, nearly shouting. This is character assassination. Sustained, Valerie said, then turned her gaze on Torres. Stick to the facts, Agent. Yes, Your Honor. The most compelling evidence relates to an incident 7 days ago. These same officers detained an African-American woman, refused to identify themselves properly, mocked her for demanding legal representation, and held her in a squad car for nearly 2 hours before releasing her without documentation. The agent's eyes narrowed. That woman, I later discovered, was you. Valerie didn't flinch. And what action has your office taken? Torres glanced toward the back of the courtroom, where 2 plainclothes men had entered quietly during his testimony. We have prepared arrest warrants for all 3 officers. With the court's permission, we'd like to serve them now. The room exploded. Klein leapt to his feet. You can't do this. She's biased. This is a setup. Monroe didn't stand. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said, officers of the court, execute the warrants. The plainclothes agents moved fast. Larson froze, eyes wide. Brewer whimpered as cuffs clicked around his wrists. Klein tried to lunge, but one of the agents tackled him against a bench. A struggle ensued. Klein shouted obscenities, but it was no use. Valerie finally stood. Remove them from my courtroom, she said calmly. As they were led out in cuffs, the courtroom was electric, but Valerie wasn't smiling, not yet, because there were still questions. Still layers to unravel. Clyde Mercer wasn't done, and his tentacles reached further than most knew, and Valerie Monroe wasn't just going to expose crooked cops, she was going to bring down the empire that protected. The courtroom was still buzzing long after the 3 officers had been hauled out in cuffs. Everyone had seen it, justice delivered in real time. Phones lit up with texts, social media posts exploded with hashtags like #JudgedByHer and #BlackWidowJustice. But Valerie Monroe wasn't basking in the attention. She knew this wasn't over. Back in chambers, she sat with a file folder open on her desk, the contents spread out like pieces of a puzzle. Each sheet was a breadcrumb leading to something bigger. Every name, every date, every signature, it all pointed back to one man, Clyde Mercer. He wasn't just a former district attorney. He was a puppeteer who operated behind closed doors, pulling strings others didn't even see. The cops who harassed her. Just pawns. Clyde had built a system, and Valerie had just kicked the first stone loose. A knock on her door broke her focus. Come in. It was Agent Torres again, this time with a woman at his side, Special Agent Naomi Griggs. Tall, composed, and carrying an air of deep authority, Griggs walked in with a file tucked under her arm and eyes sharp as razors. Judge Monroe, she said, I believe it's time we show you what we found in Mercer's sealed records. Valerie motioned them in, heart pounding. Naomi dropped the file on the desk and opened it slowly. These are sealed testimonies from whistleblowers. We've cross-referenced these with bank statements, private emails, and phone intercepts. Mercer was running a pipeline. Fake charges, false arrests, property seizures, all routed through compliant cops. Torres nodded grimly. He was using his position to build a financial empire. The black community was hit hardest. Valerie's hand tightened on her pen, and it gets worse, Naomi continued. You were targeted. Valerie blinked. Say that again. Naomi leaned in. You weren't randomly stopped. Klein and his team were tipped off. Mercer ordered it. He wanted you intimidated, quiet. You've been on his radar since your first courtroom win as a defense attorney 5 years ago. The room turned colder. Valerie rose, pacing the room, fury simmering beneath her calm expression. He tried to silence me. Naomi nodded. But he failed. Valerie turned to them both. We need to move on this. I want his empire burned to ash. Torres gave her a slow smile. Then you'll love this next part. He handed her a flash drive, surveillance footage. Mercer in a private meeting with Police Chief Dalton. They mention you. And they talk about cleaning up loose ends. You were the loose end. Valerie clenched her fists. When do we bring him in? Naomi smiled faintly. Tonight. Meanwhile, in a luxurious estate on the edge of town, Clyde Mercer poured himself a glass of aged bourbon. He was a man too rich to fear anything. Or so he believed. His fingers tapped against the glass as he stared at the fire crackling in the stone fireplace. He'd heard about the courtroom arrests. Klein, Brewer, Larson, all gone, pawns, he muttered. Expendable. A soft chime sounded from the front gate camera. Mercer pressed a button on the wall. His screen flickered, 2 unmarked SUVs waited outside, his eyes narrowed, he pressed the intercom. State your business. A man's voice replied, Federal agents. We have a few questions, Mr. Mercer. Mercer didn't flinch. Come back with a warrant. He clicked off the intercom and downed the bourbon. The game had changed. But Mercer wasn't finished playing. Back downtown. Valerie stood outside the courthouse, watching the night settle over the city. The air was heavy with heat and tension. Her driver pulled up. Where to, Judge? Take me to the federal office building. She climbed in, mind spinning with strategy. Inside the car, she tapped a message to her old mentor, Judge Harrison Caldwell. I'm going after Mercer. I need your support in chambers tomorrow. It's going to get loud. The reply came instantly, I'll be there. Hit him hard. At the federal headquarters, Naomi and Torres walked Valerie through the operation. We're securing his communications, Naomi explained. He has 2 encrypted channels we haven't cracked yet. But if he tries to run, we'll know. Torres pulled up a map. He owns 3 safe houses. We'll stake out all of them. We're betting he'll make a move once he knows the net is closing. Valerie studied the layout. Let him run. I want to watch him fall. A junior agent rushed into the room, breathless. He just booked a private jet out of Pine Bluff Airstrip. Destination, undisclosed. Naomi snapped into action. Seal the airport. Now. Valerie grabbed her coat. I'm coming with you. Torres tried to protest. It's not safe, she cut him off. Neither was walking down the street when those cops pulled me over. I'm not staying behind. At Pine Bluff Airstrip, the night wind howled across the tarmac. Mercer's jet was already warming up, the stairs down, engines whirring, federal SUVs screeched onto the scene, tires screeching as agents jumped out in formation, weapons drawn. Valerie stepped out slowly, standing just behind the front line. Mercer was halfway up the stairs when he spotted her. He stopped cold, their eyes met. She took a step forward, chin raised, going somewhere. She called out. Mercer tried to speak, but the agents were already on him. He was pulled back down the stairs, cuffed, searched, and surrounded. Valerie walked up slowly, until they stood face to face. I told you I'd find you, she said coldly. Mercer sneered. You think this ends with me? I built this system. Valerie didn't blink. Then I'll tear it down. Back in the city, word spread like wildfire: the corrupt district attorney was in custody. The crooked cops were awaiting charges. And Judge Valerie Monroe, the Black Widow once humiliated on the roadside, was leading the charge, but there was still more to uncover. Clyde Mercer was just the head of the snake. Valerie had just begun twisting the blade. The sound of metal slamming echoed down the stone corridors of the Federal Detention Center. Clyde Mercer was locked behind reinforced bars, his custom-tailored suit wrinkled, his cufflinks long confiscated. His smirk from earlier had disappeared. Instead, his eyes were bloodshot from sleepless hours and the pressure of federal agents peeling back layers of his empire. In a dimly lit interrogation room adjacent to the holding cell, Valerie Monroe stood with her arms crossed. Across from her, Agent Torres prepped the file that was going to crush Mercer's defense. But Valerie wasn't here to watch the show, she was here to orchestrate it. Torres flipped open a folder. We traced 5 shell companies linked directly to his off-the-book campaigns. You were right. He wasn't just leveraging crooked cops, he was laundering money through private prison contracts and property seizures. Valerie gave a firm nod. And that money came from the pain of my people. We make this public. Torres leaned forward, hesitant. If we go public too early, it could spook his other connections. Mercer wasn't working alone. Valerie turned slowly. Then let's smoke the rest of them out. Elsewhere in the city, Police Chief Dalton was having a crisis of his own. News of Mercer's arrest had hit like a thunderclap. The chief's office phone rang non-stop: lawyers, political figures, even officers who feared they'd be next. Mercer's empire hadn't just been powerful. It had been far-reaching. Behind closed doors, Dalton met with Captain Rhodes and Lieutenant Griggs, the 2 highest-ranking members under his command. Their meeting wasn't official, and their words were cautious: Mercer's in custody. The feds are circling. If they link him to department funds, we're done, Rhodes whispered. Dalton wiped sweat from his forehead. We clean house. Get rid of anything traceable. Logs. Emails. Reports. But what if it's too late? Griggs asked. Dalton's voice sharpened. Then we find leverage. Rhodes leaned in. We still have that footage. The one from the roadside stop with Monroe. It was never released publicly. Griggs frowned. That'll just make us look worse. Unless, Dalton said slowly, we release a cut that favors us. Paint her as aggressive. Shift the narrative. It was a desperate strategy, but desperate men made reckless decisions. Meanwhile, Valerie had returned to her chambers to prepare for the upcoming arraignment hearing. Mercer would be appearing before her, in her courtroom. The irony wasn't lost on her. She lit a candle and let the scent of sandalwood calm her nerves. Her office felt more like a war room now. Legal books were stacked like barricades, files scattered like battle plans. Yet at the center of it all was a framed photo of her late husband, Isaiah. She picked it up and stared into his eyes. You always said the law was a weapon. She whispered. Well, I'm about to use it. A buzz on her phone snapped her out of the moment. A message from Naomi Griggs. Dalton just tried to release edited body cam footage. We blocked it. We also seized his phone records. He's next. Valerie replied, issue the subpoena. I want him on the stand. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed with chaos. Protesters held signs demanding justice, reporters swarmed the steps, and onlookers packed the gallery. Inside the courtroom, Valerie entered with quiet power. Her black robe swayed slightly with each step, and the gavel in her hand might as well have been a sledgehammer. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Valerie Monroe. The gallery stood. Clyde Mercer was escorted in wearing a bright orange jumpsuit. Shackled and pale, he tried to sit tall, but the gravity of the moment crushed his composure. Valerie stared him down as he took his seat. This court is now in session, she declared. The opening motions were read. Charges were listed: racketeering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations. Mercer said nothing, his lawyer doing all the speaking, but the real moment came when Valerie called a surprise witness. Defense may object, she said coldly, but this court allows it under the federal whistleblower provision. From the rear of the courtroom, a familiar figure entered. It was Officer Jerome Ward, a former patrolman who had mysteriously resigned after a brief, 6-month tenure under Dalton. No one knew why he left. Until now, Ward raised his right hand, was sworn in, and took the stand. Valerie leaned forward. Officer Ward, would you please tell this court what you told federal agents last week? Ward's voice was firm. I was instructed to falsify 3 police reports related to citizens Mercer considered problematic. 2 of those people were later arrested without cause. The third was Judge Monroe. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Valerie remained stone-faced. Who gave the orders? She asked. Captain Rhodes, Ward replied. But he said they came from the top, from Mercer. And what about Police Chief Dalton? Ward hesitated. He oversaw the entire system. He signed off on the reports. Told us to neutralize activists before they gained too much attention. Another shockwave rolled through the crowd. Mercer's attorney jumped up. Objection. This is hearsay. Valerie's gavel slammed down. Overruled. This is a sworn deposition, verified by federal agents. You'll sit down or be removed. Mercer leaned toward his lawyer, whispering urgently, but it was too late. Valerie turned to the gallery. The court will recess for 1 hour. When we return, we will begin the motion to freeze all of Mercer's known assets and request grand jury proceedings for Chief Dalton. She stood, the gavel falling with finality. Court adjourned. Back in chambers, Naomi Griggs met Valerie with a rare smile that was masterful. Valerie removed her robe and sank into her chair. It's not over. No, Naomi agreed. But the foundation's shaking. Torres entered next, holding a file with Dalton's call logs. You're going to want to see this, he said. He was tipped off last night. Someone warned him you were planning to subpoena him. He may try to flee. Valerie's eyes narrowed. Then we don't wait. Issue the warrant. Bring him in. Naomi hesitated. You want to do it in court? Valerie nodded slowly. Let him walk into my courtroom, smug and arrogant. Then let's see his face when he sees who's signing his arrest warrant. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Police Chief Dalton's convoy approached the courthouse. He emerged from his black SUV dressed like a man in control, impeccable dark gray suit, aviators hiding the nervous twitch in his eyes, and a team of legal advisors trailing behind him like sheep behind a wolf. He waved confidently at the cameras, even offering a smirk to the few reporters shouting questions. He didn't know, inside the building, Judge Valerie Monroe sat at the head of her courtroom like a queen on a battlefield. The gavel resting before her was more than a symbol of order today, it was a promise. As Dalton entered, she glanced briefly at Naomi Griggs, seated beside Agent Torres on the prosecution bench. Both nodded. Everything was set. Dalton took the stand as a cooperative witness. He wasn't under arrest, yet. But he'd agreed to give testimony concerning internal policies linked to Mercer's corruption charges. Or so he thought. The courtroom fell silent as Valerie addressed him. Chief Dalton, she began, her voice calm but firm, you are here under oath. Your testimony will determine whether further investigation into your department is warranted. Dalton cleared his throat. Understood, Your Honor. She looked down at the file in front of her. Let's begin with your knowledge of the civilian reports filed against your officers over the last 3 years. Why were many of these dismissed without review? Dalton kept his voice even. We determined them to be unfounded. Our Internal Affairs Division, you mean Captain Rhodes? Valerie interrupted, her gaze piercing. Dalton hesitated. Yes. Naomi stood. Permission to present Exhibit F. Granted, Valerie said. Griggs handed over a set of sealed documents, unwrapping them for the jury and audience to see. These are transcripts from a recorded phone call between Dalton and Mercer, dated 2 months before the roadside harassment of Judge Monroe. In it, Dalton agrees to suppress civilian complaints to keep the heat off the program. A murmur stirred in the courtroom. Dalton's jaw tightened. That recording was taken out of context. Valerie's gavel struck once. Answer directly, Chief. Did you instruct officers to target activists and suppress complaints against those actions? Dalton's cool demeanor cracked. I was following city pressure. There were initiatives, pressure from up high. You mean Mercer, Valerie snapped. Did you take orders from him? Dalton's hands began to tremble. I didn't know it would go this far. I didn't know who she was. Valerie rose from her chair, silence consuming every corner of the courtroom. Say that again. Dalton looked up, his mask of arrogance completely stripped away. I didn't know who you were. If I had, that's the problem, she cut in coldly. You thought I was just another black woman. Just another face you could bully, silence, or erase. But I am not just a face. I am the law. Gasps rippled through the room. Naomi stood once more. Based on the evidence presented, and under federal jurisdiction in collaboration with the Justice Department, we motion for the immediate arrest of Police Chief Dalton on charges of obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and violation of civil rights. Valerie didn't hesitate. Motion granted. The bailiff approached, and Dalton, wide-eyed and frozen, stepped back instinctively. You can't do this. He shouted, eyes darting around as if the walls were closing in. You don't understand what this will do to the department. Valerie stepped down from the bench. Walking slowly toward him, eyes never blinking, you should have thought about that before weaponizing your badge against the people you swore to protect. The bailiff gripped Dalton by the arms, spinning him around and locking the handcuffs around his wrists. Reporters lunged forward, snapping photos, and courtroom observers whispered in disbelief. Chief Dalton was led out of the courtroom, humiliated, exposed, and broken. Later that day, Valerie sat alone in her chambers. The adrenaline had faded, but the fire in her soul still burned. A quiet knock tapped against her door. It opened slowly, revealing Naomi. You okay? She asked. Valerie looked up. No. But I'm focused. Naomi walked in and placed a small file on the desk. We've got 2 more names. Internal documents show that Captain Rhodes and Lieutenant Griggs were on payrolls that Mercer's offshore account funded. Mercer wasn't just bribing officials, he created a shadow network. Valerie exhaled deeply. They'll face justice, too. All of them. Naomi gave a tight smile. The city's watching now. And they're not looking away. Meanwhile, Captain Rhodes and Lieutenant Griggs sat in a smoke-filled bar on the outskirts of the city. The TV above the bar flashed news footage of Dalton's arrest. Rhodes poured another whiskey shot, his hands shaking. They're coming for us, he said. Griggs stared blankly at the screen. Dalton was the buffer. He falls, we're next. Rhodes pulled out his phone. We go underground. Get out of the state. They won't find us. You don't run from federal charges, Griggs muttered. They'll chase us to hell and back. Rhodes slammed his glass down. Then we fight back. Griggs turned slowly. You thinking what I'm thinking? Rhodes nodded. If Monroe wants a war, she's gonna get one. Back at her office, Valerie stared at the city skyline. Darkness had fallen, but the courthouse glowed like a lighthouse in the distance, beaconing truth to those lost in corruption. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Stay away from the case. Or pay the price. She stared at the message. Then deleted it. Valerie Monroe had already paid the price, and now, it was time for them to. It was nearly midnight when the courthouse alarm sounded. Red strobes pulsed across the front lobby, and a low mechanical hum vibrated through the marble floors. Within seconds, armed marshals flooded the hallways, weapons drawn and boots echoing like war drums. Judge Valerie Monroe was already in her chambers, typing out a late-night judicial memo, when her security detail burst through the door. Ma'am, we need to move you, now. Valerie didn't hesitate. She grabbed her briefcase, slipped her Glock 43 into her coat pocket, and followed them swiftly down a side corridor. She'd insisted on firearm training after her roadside attack. Now, her instincts kicked in with chilling clarity. In the shadows of a nearby stairwell, Captain Rhodes and Lieutenant Griggs crept with surgical precision. Both were armed, dressed in tactical black, and wearing stolen access badges. They hadn't come to talk, they came to eliminate a threat. Rhodes motioned with his hand. Griggs broke left toward the records room while Rhodes ascended the back stairwell, silencer already screwed onto his pistol. Their plan was simple: kill Monroe, torch any files linking them to Mercer, and vanish before sunrise, but they'd underestimated her. Again, Valerie reached the sub-basement parking structure where her armored car was waiting. As her detail swept the exit, a sudden shot rang out. One marshal dropped instantly. Bullet in the shoulder, ambush. Someone shouted. Gunfire erupted in all directions. Valerie ducked behind a pillar, drawing her weapon. She peered around the edge, just in time to see Rhodes coming out of the stairwell like a ghost. His eyes were wild, teeth clenched, and his weapon was aimed directly at her. Drop it! Yelled one of the marshals. Rhodes fired first. Missed by inches, Valerie returned 2 rounds, her hands steady, her stance like she'd been born in combat. One bullet hit Rhodes in the side. He stumbled but didn't go down. She charged across the garage, weaving between vehicles while marshals laid cover fire. Sparks danced across car hoods, windshields shattered. And the scent of burnt rubber filled the air. Griggs appeared next, flanking from the side, spraying bullets toward the entrance. One marshal dove behind a concrete beam, but another caught a hit in the leg. Valerie crouched behind a black Escalade, breathing hard, her pulse a hammer. She checked her magazine, 3 rounds left. Suddenly, a pair of headlights flashed. It was Naomi. In her own armored SUV, she crashed through the side entrance of the garage, screeching to a halt beside Valerie. The passenger door burst open. "Get in." Valerie dove inside as Naomi floored it. Tires screamed against the concrete. Rhodes fired at the fleeing vehicle, but Naomi swerved, clipping him with the front bumper. He crumpled to the ground with a grunt. Griggs tried to pursue, but a flashbang tossed by a marshal disoriented him long enough for the team to surround and subdue him. They got Griggs, but Rhodes was gone. By 3 a.m., news vans were camped outside the courthouse like scavengers circling a battlefield. Valerie stood in front of a podium, a deep gash on her temple from flying shrapnel, and her robe torn at the hem. Cameras flashed. "This is not just an attack on me," she said into the microphones, voice steady and cold. "This is an attack on our justice system. But I will not back down. I will not be intimidated." Reporters clamored with questions, but she raised her hand. "Let me be very clear, I know who I am. And I know exactly who they are. This court will not rest until every last piece of their corruption is exposed and held accountable." That same night, Rhodes hobbled into a warehouse on the city's edge, nursing a bleeding wound and seething with fury. He tore off his vest, grabbed a whiskey bottle from a crate, and downed it in furious gulps. They'd underestimated her, again, but he had one final move. He pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number labeled only M. A deep voice answered. "I thought you'd be dead." "Monroe's still breathing," Rhodes growled. "But not for long. Then finish it. Or don't bother calling again." The line went dead. Rhodes stared at the wall, chest heaving. In the corner sat a duffel bag. Inside were explosives, blueprints of the courthouse, and a silenced rifle. This wasn't about money anymore, it was war. Back at her home, Valerie sat quietly on the couch, a cold compress to her face. Naomi paced nearby. "They're going to keep coming," Naomi said. Valerie didn't flinch. "Good. So will we." Naomi stopped pacing. "You ready for tomorrow?" Valerie nodded. Tomorrow was sentencing. Griggs had confessed everything once in custody: Mercer's blackmail network, the bribes, the rigged reports, and the shadow orders. He'd flipped, offering details in exchange for leniency. That morning, he would face judgment, her judgment. And he wouldn't be alone. 3 more officers had been named, and arrest warrants were already being drawn. Valerie looked down at her robe, blood-streaked but symbolic. Tomorrow, she'd wear a new one. Fresh, pressed, and righteous, the courtroom would be full. Cameras rolling. Officers watching, and if Rhodes showed up, let him come. She was done running. Elsewhere in the city, Rhodes checked his watch. The courthouse opened in 6 hours. He smiled coldly. The sun crept over the skyline, casting long shadows across the imposing steps of the downtown courthouse. Reporters lined the barricades, camera lenses trained on the main doors. The energy was electric. Today wasn't just any court proceeding. Today, Judge Valerie Monroe was taking her seat. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Prosecutors whispered. Officers stood along the walls. Even the defendants, including the newly arrested officers, Detective Price, Sergeant Malone, and Officer Blake, fidgeted nervously. Word had already spread about what happened in the parking garage. Rhodes was still at large, but nobody expected him to be stupid enough to show up. Then the doors opened. A hush fell over the room. Valerie stepped through the threshold wearing a pristine black robe, tailored, clean, and commanding. Her hair was pinned back in her signature bun, and a narrow scar on her forehead marked the only trace of the chaos from the night before. The air around her was heavy with silence and fear. Court was in session. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. The officers she'd once been harassed by, who had laughed at her pain, sat stiffly at the defendant's table. Their smirks from months earlier were gone. Every eye followed Valerie as she ascended to the bench. She adjusted her seat. "Be seated." The Crowd Saturday. Today, we are reviewing the charges brought forth by the state regarding conspiracy, unlawful use of authority, falsifying reports, and harassment of civilians, including my own person. Gasps echoed. She had spoken it aloud. Malone leaned over to Price, whispering, "She can't preside over this conflict of interest." Valerie leaned forward. "To clarify, I have the full authorization of the Chief Justice and the State Bar to proceed in this unique circumstance. Transparency is paramount. Your defense attorneys failed to object. Shall we continue?" They said nothing. Valerie continued. "Detective Griggs gave sworn testimony. We have the footage. The calls. The GPS logs. You were part of Mercer's network. You carried out the street-level operations." Malone visibly sweated. A screen behind the judge flickered to life, displaying audio-transcribed wiretaps, Price's voice clearly giving orders to intimidate the widow with the big mouth. "She filed too many reports. Time to scare her quiet." Price's face turned pale. Valerie turned the page of her docket. "These aren't allegations anymore. These are facts." Just then, the double doors slammed open, a loud bang followed, the courtroom erupted. Rhodes stood in the entryway, covered in blood, his arm wrapped in a dirty bandage, and holding a handgun. Chaos broke out instantly. People screamed, ducked, and the bailiffs drew weapons. "Everyone back!" he yelled. "I'm ending this. Right now." Valerie remained still. Eyes locked on him, Rhodes staggered down the aisle. "You think you've won, Monroe? You think that robe gives you power? You're still the same woman I left bleeding on the side of the road." "You're right," Valerie replied coldly. "But now I have something you never will, justice on my side." Behind him, the side entrance burst open. Naomi and a special U.S. Marshal task force charged in. Rhodes turned to fire. Too late. A single shot from Naomi's rifle dropped him to his knees. The weapon skittered across the floor. Rhodes grunted, reaching for it again, but Valerie stood up. "I wouldn't." He froze. 5 officers piled on him. Cuffed. Dragged out of the courtroom with his head hung low. Reporters outside caught every frame of it, his bloodied face, his rage, his defeat. When the doors shut again, Valerie faced the court. "Let that serve as your final warning. You do not get to silence truth with a gun." The courtroom slowly regained composure. She returned to the bench, calm and in full control. By noon, the verdicts were delivered. Guilty. 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 Each officer's sentence came down hard. Valerie showed no leniency. Years behind bars. Public disgrace. Badge revoked. Pensions gone. Malone wept. Price stared ahead blankly. Blake begged for mercy. There was none. Outside, as Valerie walked down the steps under heavy protection, crowds applauded. Reporters swarmed. Naomi flanked her, protective but proud. A journalist shouted, "Judge Monroe, do you have a message for the public?" Valerie stopped, looked directly into the cameras, and said, "Don't ever underestimate a woman who's lost everything and still chooses justice over revenge. We are not broken. We are rising." You just watched a powerful story of redemption and reckoning, a woman who turned her pain into power and made the system answer for its crimes. What would you have done in her shoes? Let's talk about it in the comments. I'm reading everything, and if this story gave you chills, or made you sit up and shout yes. Don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. More stories like this are coming your way, so stay tuned, and until next time, stand for truth, fight for justice, and never underestimate the power of a woman with nothing to lose.